Hello, I'm Emma Cockrell and welcome to my natural food cookery class. Now, one of the things that I do as a nutritional therapist is to find recipes and meal ideas for my clients who are on very restricted diets. A lot of my clients can't eat eggs, a lot of my clients can't eat wheat-based products, flour, bread and those sorts of things. So one of my roles is to find recipes and foods that can replace those so that they don't lose out on valuable nutrients and get low in energy. So with the current crisis of very low eggs availability in the shops at the moment due to the lockdown of coronavirus, and also a lot of people are saying we can't find wheat flour in the shops, the recipes which I generally work with are ideal for this situation because we don't use wheat and we don't often or have to use eggs. So today I'd like to show you a way of doing pastry in 3 different ways, none of them using wheat flour, all of them gluten-free and one of them grain-free. In an upcoming recipe that I'll do in a future video, I'll actually show how to do a vegetable crust, so there's no grain at all, no sort of carbohydrate there, just relying on vegetables. So that's quite fun and we'll look at that later on. But today, 3 ways for a pastry. We're going to do an oat pastry. So if you're gluten-free, you may be okay with gluten-free oats, but they can be a bit iffy for some people. But they can make a very, very simple pastry if you can tolerate oats. Then we're going to use brown rice flour and yellow maize meal. Those are often available in supermarkets, particularly yellow maize meal or polenta, fine polenta, in the international aisle where they do a blend of different types of foods availability. And then we'll do a coconut flour pastry as well. And of course, coconut isn't a grain, so that's completely grain-free for those who need to avoid grains or who want to experiment. One of the things that we find with working with coconut flour is that it needs a lot of binding. So generally, recipes with coconut flour will have egg, but for our purposes today, we'll be using chickpea flour to bring that binding quality to that pastry. So let's get going. We're going to be making, first of all, that oat pastry. I'm going to be making very small quantities because I'm doing 3 at one time and I've already made some to show you the finished products. So I will be putting the full ingredients lists up on my blog at www.nutritionhelp.com, so you can get all the full recipes there, and I'll try and explain as I'm going along. So I'm going to be using 1/4 of a cup of oats. You can use a full cup if you're making a good sized quiche kind of dish. Oh, and I forgot to say that to finish off with these recipes, I'll be doing a savoury flan that doesn't use eggs as well. And it really is the end of my week. I'm going shopping this afternoon. I had a window of opportunity early this morning to do this filming and to do these recipes now. So I really am using the last bits that are in the fridge. So I'm hoping that will give you a sense of being able to use what you've got available and that you don't have to go out buying special things once you've got the basic store cupboard ingredients. So I've used 1/4 cup of oats, you'll use a full cup, and to that I'm going to add some extra virgin olive oil. Now to my 1/4 cup I'm just going to use one teaspoon. If you're using a full cup, you'll use 4 teaspoons. And then we'll just mix that well in. And then the key to working with oats, and actually a lot of gluten-free grains in making a pastry, is to use boiling water. Completely opposite to how you'd normally make pastry, where you have to keep everything really, really cold. To make this work, to make it bind, we're using boiling water. I've got some water ready boiled here. And I'm just going to use 2 teaspoons of boiling water. So with a cup of oats, you'd use about 8 teaspoons, but add a little bit at a time. And stir that then thoroughly. Now, you can do this in a food processor, which really blends it down, but I just want to show you that you don't have to to do that. Now just keep kind of really stirring that together, pushing that well together, and that's helping the oats to absorb that water. And if you can see, it's coming together. Perfect. There we are, that's come together into a fairly sticky, at this point in time, sticky dough. I'm just going to leave that now. You do find that with each different type of oats, each different type of flour, you may need a little bit more or less water to cause this good binding to happen. And so do add a drop at a time. And as you can see, I've just added a tiny little bit more because I don't want that to be too dry. And I'm just going to leave it for a moment until I've made the other pastries before I roll that out. So that's going to cool down a little bit. There we are, that's perfect. A little bit sticky, and as I leave it, that's going to become less sticky. But you can see that's come together into a dough. There we are. So pop that on one side if you're making that as your key pastry. Pop that on one side and let that water really well absorb so it's not so sticky, and then it's very easy to roll out. So the second pastry I'm going to show you is with the brown rice flour and yellow maize meal. So always we're using flours in their unrefined state. We don't want to use refined grains because they turn to sugar so much more quickly in the digestive process. So we want the foods to break down to sugar nice and gently so that they don't upset blood sugar balance too much. So we're going to use, for my purposes, I'm using 1/4 cup of yellow maize meal. As I said, you can get that in whole food shops or in the international aisle. You're looking for fine maize meal, or if you can't get fine, put it through a blender to blend that down a bit further if you can do that. And brown rice flour, again 1/4. For your purposes, if you're making a larger flan, then you just use half of each of these, 1/2 cup of each of those flours. Brown rice flour is often found in supermarkets. Sometimes it's sold in a little tube, so you probably only have enough in one tube for this recipe, but otherwise you can get big packs in most whole food shops. So to my flours, I'm going to add then 2 teaspoons of extra virgin olive oil. Now, one of the problems with working with gluten-free grains as flours is that they don't have the elasticity, they don't have the stretch that gluten brings to wheat flour. So that means that these flours can get a little bit hard when you're cooking with them. They don't rise so well if you're baking with them, but if you're making a pastry, they can go hard far more easily. So to counteract that, I like to put some grated vegetables in. And that's, to anybody who knows me, that's no surprise because I do add vegetables to most things. But they do have a genuine purpose in this recipe in that they stop the pastry becoming too hard and keep it fairly soft. So you can see I've just worked that extra virgin olive oil into those flours, and it's a little bit like very, very fine breadcrumbs at that point in time. Now to that, this recipe, I'm going to use 1/4 cup of the ground, finely grated butternut squash. You can use finely grated carrot, which I've used in the one that I've used already made to demonstrate. You can use courgette, you can use celeriac, you could use parsnip. So any great vegetable that you can grate finely, and you're using the same quantity as you've used of each of the flours. So I used 1/4 cup of the flours, so I'm using 1/4 cup of the grated vegetable, butternut squash in this case. So if you were doubling up and using 1/2 cup of each of the flours, you'd then use 1/2 cup of the grated vegetable. So I'm then working that in. There we are. And when that's well combined, again, you can do this in a food processor, but you can see how easy it is to do it by hand. And when that's well combined, I'm going to add in some boiling water again to bring that binding quality to help it hold together. So I'm going to use 6 to 8 teaspoons. Okay. And you'd use double that if you were using double the mixture. Now, I can work that in. That was about 6 I did. You can see it's still a bit dry, so I'll add a little bit more. You really do want this to be as close to boiling as possible, so do mind your fingers. Okay, still a little bit dry. You'll see, just keep adding a teaspoonful at a time until that comes together as a lovely firm dough. As I said, every time you do this, it can be slightly different depending on the flours that you're using. You see this still isn't quite coming there. Perfect. I've got that with my hands now. Coming together to make a really workable dough. Really, really easy to handle. Again, slightly warm because we've used the hot water. So I'm just going to put that to one side again, and we'll roll that out in a minute. And then our final dough, our coconut dough. So I'm going to be using coconut flour and 1/4 cup of the coconut flour. And this time I'm going to use grated courgettes to keep this soft. Coconut flour really does have a tendency to get quite dry. It's like a very, very fine desiccated coconut. So because it's so dry, you want to add things in to help keep it moist. So we use a little bit more oil in this recipe. And again, we're going to use some grated vegetable, any vegetable that you like that grates well. I'm using courgette here, 1/4 cup of courgette. And then a tablespoon of chickpea flour instead of egg. Normally you'd use an egg in this recipe. Mix that down. And into that I'm going to use 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil. You can use coconut oil, or you could use butter if you can tolerate butter. And as I stir that should come together into a dough. So that's absolutely perfect. While I'm doing this, I realised the reason I needed to add more water to the last recipe that I said was brown rice flour and yellow maize meal was that I used coconut flour instead of the brown rice flour. So you can see that I do make mistakes, but it really doesn't matter. I just had to add a little bit more water to bring that together, that can work exactly the same. But in your recipe, use the brown rice flour. So there you can see the coconut pastry dough. Really, really easy to work with. So there we've got our three different doughs: coconut, brown rice flour, and yellow maize meal, apart from my mistake. And I just made a small amount of the oats. So what I want to show you now is how easy it is to roll those out, but we do just need to be gentle with them. So a good idea is to roll out on some baking parchment, and that really does help you to roll fairly thinly and evenly, and it doesn't stick. So just light movement. Don't need. You can put some seeds down to roll out. Whoops, it's a little bit dry, this one now. are. This is actually easier if you make a bit more. And then I'm just going to pop that one into my tin. I've got a little individual tin here. Tip that in, push it down. And just bring that up to the edges. So make a little patchwork. I must have used a slightly less in the measure than I did with the last one. But you can see, you can just pop that in and then bake that blind for about 7 to 8 minutes at 180 degrees Celsius. And then you can pop your filling in there. That's really, really easy one to do. And when that's finished, you can see it comes out like this, and it's so, you can actually take it out of the tin and put your filling in separately or cook the filling in, but it comes out really, really easily. And that's fairly crisp and full of flavour. You can flavour that up with herbs, a bit of salt and pepper if you like, to make it a savoury crust, but that's absolutely fine as it is, and you can then use that for a quiche base or an alternative kind of flan, as I'll be showing you in a minute. So our coconut dough, again, roll very, very gently. Apply very little pressure on that. You can see that's rolling quite nicely. When you're working with alternative foods, natural foods, whole foods, you almost have to forget what you've been taught as to how to properly cook, if you like. As I mentioned, the whole idea of making pastry is normally to keep everything as cold as possible. But with these sorts of flours, that's not the case. So there we are. Pop that into, I'm making a flat plate tart base here, but you can line a quiche tin or flan dish. Just cut off those edges. You can then bake those down into little biscuits, and I'm then just going to crinkle the edges. And again, you're baking that at about 180 for about 7 to 8 minutes until it's looking golden. So that's your coconut base, and that grated courgette in there will just help to stop it being too dry. And then once you've cooked it for about 8 minutes, you can then add your filling and finish off the cooking. And here's the finished product there, just beginning to get golden around the edge. And it's fairly easy to sort of ease from the dish there. Just, if I do it now, I'll probably break it, but you can see it easily comes away. Then again, you can fill that sweet or savoury as your for your topping. If you look at my blog, I've got a recipe for making a filling with butternut squash and coconut cream, and that makes a nice, like an egg custard almost in the middle. So that's your coconut pastry. And then lastly, we've got our yellow maize meal and what should be brown rice flour, but I put the coconut flour in by mistake. Again, very gentle rolling movements, and then you shouldn't have a problem rolling that out. There we are. And then in the same way, lift that over and pop that into your dish. And then again, cook that for 7 or 8 minutes. and there's your finished crust. And that really is nice and light and very easy to make and to use. Now I just want to come on now to an idea for a topping, because as we said, one of the things that people are finding really hard to buy in the shops are eggs right now. And so we want some alternatives, how to make a flan, a savoury flan, without using eggs. So what I did was I cooked down with some extra virgin olive oil and just a tablespoon of water in there as well to stop the oil getting too hot. I've cooked down some red onion and some broccoli. And what I did with the broccoli, just show you, it's the last bit I've got left. I took it into little spears and then chopped finely through the stem, and then just took it up to the little florets. And then I put all of that into the pan with the roughly chopped red onion. You can use whatever vegetables you've got. Pepper, roasted courgette, roasted squash, roasted carrot, parsnips, tomato, whatever you've got, cauliflower, chop roughly, pop in the pan, a little bit of extra virgin olive oil, about a tablespoon or so, a tablespoon of water, and then just cook that down with a lid on so it steam fries over a gentle heat until those veggies are soft. And then to that, I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of chia seeds. And again, these are really readily available now in the supermarkets and an awful lot cheaper than they were when they first came out. And then 1 teaspoon of ground flaxseed, linseed. If you haven't got a grinder or can't get it ground, you could use the whole seeds. And then stir that well into those cooked vegetables. I'm also going to add some seasoning, a little bit of oregano here. And you can add a pinch of Himalayan pink salt and some black pepper. With those vegetables, I also put a clove of garlic. If you can tolerate dairy, you can cook those vegetables down in butter, and that will bring an extra richness to it, but not necessarily. The olive oil is a delicious flavour as well. And then to that, I'm just going to add 2 teaspoons of hot water. And those seeds that I added will absorb that water and become a little bit gel-like, and in so doing provide a bit of a setting action, if you like, to those vegetables. So we've got our ready cooked flan dish here, flan base. I'm just going to pop those vegetables over and then you can decorate it or top it however you like. You could, of course, if you're alright with dairy, you could put some cheese over that. I'm going to put some rings of red pepper. It's been well washed, obviously. It just introduces more colour, more nutrients into the dish. And I'm going to sprinkle it with some pumpkin seeds, which will add more protein. There we are. And I'm just going to pat that down to help it all sort of gel together, set together. And then you can just an extra little sprinkle of oregano over the top. And then pop that into your oven, 180, for about 15 to 20 minutes until the veggies are looking cooked and golden. And I've got the finished one here. And you can see, if I slice that, It's not going to be as set as if you'd put an egg into that. You can obviously add an egg instead of the seeds, or as well as the seeds if you've got an egg there, and that will help it set. And there you've got, it's going to crumble for me now because I'm showing you. There we are. And there you've got a delicious light crust vegetable tart. And that, I need a proper flan server here. But that really is delicious. A nice little crunch to the pastry, but kept soft with the vegetables added, and then lovely Mediterranean flavours coming in with that tart topping with those pan roasted vegetables and the oregano and garlic. So I hope that's given you some ideas for our three-way pastry. We've got the oat pastry, perhaps the simplest one to do, and that can also form the basis of oat cakes. We've got our coconut flour pastry, and then we've got our rice flour and brown rice flour and yellow maize meal pastry, and we've turned that into a vegetable tart. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope it's helpful for you so that you can look out for other flours, other ingredients when you're in the supermarket which may be available while we're struggling to get wheat flour and eggs. So thank you for watching. Do check out my blog and my website at www.nutritionhelp.com, and hopefully I'll be back again soon with some more recipes. Bye bye for now.